I saw 3 angels seated at the table, radiant and calm and wise and wholly real as we who stumble here today are quite unable to be or know ourselves. If they will heal our broken bones, heal fish and meat and bread and wine, heal wounds of mortal flesh, then may we take the lower seat and join the throng and side by side and mesh the ill, the whole, the old, the young, and be a single body, breaking, falling time, a part of this creating Trinity, wiser than reason, lowly and sublime. I saw 3 angels standing at my door. Come in, as you have done before. It's so good to be here with you today. The poem I just read was The Guests of Abraham by Madeleine L'Engle. I read it out loud at the very first Renaissance service back in 1999. It is my great hope that over the next 40 minutes or so, as I share poems and images and stories and music videos, that you might come to have eyes to see all the ways that the arts can be a window to the divine, and return home with a new understanding of how the artists in your congregation and community can be your greatest assets as you look for new ways to reach the world on behalf of the gospel of our risen Lord. "27 years ago, Christ called me to himself in the infamous, some would say notorious, beach town of Venice, California. I told the story of the role a little Lutheran church in the neighborhood played in my conversion in my first book, Baptism by Fire, which was published by Bantam in 1998. It was part of a trinity of creative first fruits. And like so many of God's gifts, one that keeps on giving today. This book is now being rediscovered and repurposed by many Lutheran churches who are realizing they don't really even know what it sounds like inside the mind and heart of someone who does not yet believe. And so they've set out to study my stream of consciousness thoughts and observations to help them. Scary. My first year as a believer was a remarkable season of freedom. Every Tuesday night I would ride my bike to my pastor's house, where he led a small group called Frontiers of Faith. There we learned prayer practices like Lectio Divina, centering prayer, Ignatian imaging prayer, and the riches of small group fellowship. His name was Ken Frazee, and he was uniquely gifted to speak to the unconventional creative population that God had called him to serve. It was there at Pastor Ken's house that I first saw this ceramic quadtic of Jesus roller skating with friends at Venice Beach. The artist is a Benedictine monk named Father Maurer. He lived half the year in Bruges, where he created massive monochromatic museum-worthy paintings, and half the year at St. Andrew's Abbey, which is about an hour and a half from my house and a place I'd already come to think of as my second home. And there he created these little ceramic vocation-specific angels he called his cookies. This was the only site-specific ceramic he'd ever done. The first time I came to Venice Beach, Father Maurer said, I just knew Jesus would love spending time here. Not long after I saw this ceramic, I had a very clear vision of it recreated as a mural up big on the fence outside the school where I had just dropped my son off for kindergarten. And so, knowing nothing about church voters' meetings or Lutheran resistance to change or just anything outside of the norm, I set out to make it happen. When I first asked Father Maurer about using his art, he said no. Then he smiled impishly. I need to recreate it for you so we can update the prices on the signs and use brighter colors to attract the passers-by. He renewed his singular work in bright acrylic on a 4-canvas panel, and I sat with him under an apple tree at the Abbey while he worked, and we talked about life and faith and God. I then had his panels photographed, transferred onto billboard vinyl, and wrapped around sheets of iron suitable for mounting. We were almost there. Until we discovered that the city wasn't too keen on these 4 metal panels being mounted to an old chain link fence. Something about fierce winds and heavy flying objects. So I reached out to our local councilwoman, Ruth Galanter, a progressive Jewish activist, who wrote a letter on our behalf, which stated emphatically, I can think of no better image to grace the gateway to Venice Beach. Her endorsement got us greenlit for an alternative plan. Okay, so picture this. Now at my second voters' meeting, against whispers of, who is that and what is she talking about? I asked the church if we could mount the mural directly onto the facade of the church, just under the rose window. I had no idea what I was saying. Okay. Despite a great deal of grumbling, the vote was unanimous with only one abstention. The unveiling ceremony was in 1997, only 2 years after Christ had called me to himself. All the monks came. So did the local news crews. A reporter asked me about the fact that it was, unusual to have a Catholic monk's mural on a Lutheran church. It was only then that it dawned on me, oh, yeah, right, suddenly recalling some old high school history text about the Reformation. I was like, oh, I guess so. I don't know. Today, Jesus roller skating is considered one of the most famous murals in Venice. And there are a lot of murals in Venice. And it is a frequent photo stop for tourists. Ironically, when the Catholic Church just around the corner decided that they should have a bigger one, bigger and better with surfers on it, the congregation thought it was a waste of money and voted it down. Okay, I'm going to move our little narrative forward here now with some passages from a memoir in progress. Pastor Ken gave me a 3-year subscription to a perfect-bound magazine called Image, a journal of the arts and religion. Some of you might realize that the man who was standing here 5 minutes ago is now the editor-in-chief of that publication. Anyhow, he gave me that magazine, and it was full of poems, interviews, and essays, many of which used terms and concepts, both artistic and theological, that were way over my head. In many ways, the art world and the academic religious world suffered from a common ailment. Those who gain some mastery in their fields become tethered to specialized lexicon and insider references that then render them incapable of communicating with people who don't know the lingo. But the art in the journal spoke to me, and I began to build a file in my brain for how a painting could reflect the image of God in a way that a sermon never could. Okay, so it's 1998. Baptism by Fire was just released. The mural had been up for a year. And now things are really going to start moving. On Saturday, September 11th, 3 years before the towers went down, flames shot up through the roof of the sanctuary of First Lutheran Church of Venice. Word spread fast. Members raced over in the dark, some of us in our jammies, clustering behind the last row of ash-covered pews as the firefighters poked through the rafters for hot spots. The older members weighed in. Well, you know it's from all those amplifiers they use at the contemporary service. The younger members had their own theories. It looks like it started right near that new organ. That's just too much power for a little space like that. Some speculated that the mural must have had something to do with it. For the record, it did not. We quickly settled into the new Sunday normal of setting up metal folding chairs, pulling out microphones, and worshiping in the parish hall where the scent of tater tots from school lunches never quite left the air. I never suspected that on one of these perfectly ordinary Sundays, everything would change. Could someone please turn off the lights, Pastor Ken said. It was time for the sermon. An usher pulled down an old screen embedded in the framework of the stage, and Ken pressed a button. I heard the click and whir of a slide projector, and in a blink, we were no longer in a parish hall in Venice, but in a field of purple irises in Vincent van Gogh's village of Saint-Remy. For the next 25 minutes, he cast a spell over the room as slide after slide bathed the hall with beauty. Sunflowers, starry nights, the artist's bedroom, Van Gogh's face in different ages and stages. And as Ken spoke, he began to reveal that beneath all the well-documented talent and the pain was a deep and abiding faith in Jesus Christ. He pointed to lesser-known images of the Pietà, of Jesus in a crown of thorns, of crucifixes, highlighting the timeline of Van Gogh's life, his suffering, his faith. In good times, it resulted in work like his popular image of the sower. To the average museum goer, it's a lovely painting of a sunny day on a farm. But to a Christian, it's the very essence of the gospel, Jesus sowing life-giving seeds in us that we may sow them in others. Lights, please, Ken said. I have no idea what happened after that. As you can imagine, I could relate to what Dave Schmidt was talking about earlier about being transported. I was not there anymore. Likely the offering plate was passed, another song sung, some final announcements made. I was 1,000 miles away, in a land where the walls had just been removed and the ceiling lifted and all the rule books tossed to the curb. So that could be a worship service. The whole thing, all in the dark, all told with art, poetry, psalms, chant refrains. And in that moment, in my mind's eye, the Renaissance service was born. The day after the Van Gogh revelation, I threw open the trailer door of Ken's temporary office and said in one burst, "I've got an idea!" He listened as I cast the vision for how the sanctuary would look and feel, and the way art and poetry and music could be used to set a tone of both fullness and silence. How the message would focus on a different artist each week and their relationship to God in all its varied complexity. "It's inspired," he said. "But I want it to be like a real church service," I said, "so I need you to tell me what the elements are so that it's, I didn't know the word liturgically correct at the time, so I think what I said was kosher. even though, I know it's going to be different, I want it to be right. "Okay," Ken said. "Well, you'll want to begin with some sort of invocation of light." I always had a small notebook with me. This one had a Celtic blessing on the cover. "I don't think we want to deal with serving communion in something like this," he said. No, I agreed and made note of it. No communion. "But we should have the Lord's Prayer." "Oh, of course. And a gospel reading," he said. I paused. "But mainly poems." "Poems and a gospel reading," he countered. "Right, good. And a benediction. a blessing at the end. I mouthed the words as I wrote the letters. Benediction equals blessing. Ken never had to refer to a guidebook or even look off in the distance to recall. He just knew. Traditionally, an evening service like this, which is called Vespers or Compline, would end with what's called the Nunc Dimittis. Technically, it serves as a cue that you are dismissed, but the lyrics are usually, let your servant now go in peace. It comes from the Song of Simeon in Luke, chapter 2, I think. I loved that he wasn't sure. For all the meaning I'd come to find in the passages of Scripture, I still couldn't tell you chapter and verse for any of them. I just really want to have the feeling like we have at the Abbey, the feeling of singing the Psalms. The Psalms, I think, are key. Psalmody is very much part of the tradition of evening worship, he said. It is? Okay. Psalmody equals singing the Psalms, often at night. Okay. Wow, I said, setting down my pen. So, what do you think? I think we should do it. Really? I think you should put together a proposal for the Board of Worship and let's see what they say. Oh, I said, a crimp in my sigh. I still carried with me the sense of order established in the work world. If the guy in charge says yes, then the answer is yes. But the local church belongs to every member, and the guy in charge isn't really the guy in charge. Wrestling a vision from the air onto the page is challenging even when you have some level of expertise. I had none. No art background, no music background, no poetry background, no church background. People got master's degrees in these things. Who knew? I started with the framing, the spine, in church speak, the liturgy. Imagining what would be seen and what would be heard and how those things would relate to one another to serve the larger story. Dennis Jacobson was the kind of worship director who knew and loved all forms of music and was thrilled to be a part of whatever it is I was trying to do. I said, I want to use some Taizé chants. They just really help people get out of their heads and tee them up for some good silence. But I want to mix them together with some of those beautiful songs we did at Advent last year. I said, that whole service just slayed me. Dennis's laughter in a big cantor's baritone, and he began rifling through his overstuffed files. One copy of Haugen's Holden Village Evensong coming up, he said, thumbing deeper into the treasure. And here's some Taizé, take this one, and oh, you might want to look at this one too. And suddenly my arms were full of music that in the hands of musicians and singers I hadn't yet recruited would lift people up off the page and transport them. I couldn't read a note of it, but I could match the lyrics to recordings, and that's what I did. Again and again, until these chant refrains played in a perpetual loop in my brain, guiding me as I searched for the images that would accompany each one. I shopped the websites of museums all over the world. I visited contemporary galleries and studied the personal pages of artists I'd found through Image Journal and Siva and networks that began to connect with me. PowerPoint was the latest trend in worship, but I refused to consider it. The risk of breaking the spell of silence and beauty when a program accidentally defaults to a cluttered digital desktop wasn't worth it. I needed to have a physical slide in my possession for every painting or photograph I was going to use. Some were purchased, some were borrowed. Collecting led me to the basement at LACMA, the LA County Museum of Art, where hundreds and thousands of slides were available on loan to teachers. Are you an educator? The slide librarian asked. My heart stopped. I teach junior great books. It was a program I'd started at the school that year, technically a fourth first fruit. And that's what the slides are for? I'm a horrible liar. I found over the years it's better not to try. Well, no, she eyed me skeptically as I launched into a vivid description of the service and how art would serve as a window to the divine. Is this a commercial venture? Oh no, I don't make any money. It's just a labor of love. Will you be selling tickets? No, it's just a gift. It's a gift to the community. She reached in her file and pulled out a form. You'll need to get someone at your organization to sign this. They need to say you're an educator. Files are alphabetical with the A's over that way. You can check out 36 at a time. One by one, I pulled out the long, thin drawers, feeling like Claudia in the mixed-up files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankenweiler. How many of you remember that wonderful book? Row upon row upon row of these tightly bunched slides, and I lifted out one at a time, and I would go, "Oh, Lord, hear my prayer." No. "Oh, Lord, hear my..." No. "Oh, Lord, hear my prayer. Oh, Lord." Yes. Over time, the director, an atheist, grew so intrigued that she decided she needed to come check out the service for herself. More than once. One last key detail. I needed a screen that didn't strain the neck. So I turned to an artist friend who was a new school parent, not a believer, maybe a seeker. Even as I told him what I was looking for, he began to sketch, ultimately creating a portable stand out of copper plumber's piping. He said, "I think the copper is going to work well with the candlelight. I think there's going to be that warm glow you're looking for." And that way, he built it in pieces so I could assemble it by myself with a tripod base and brackets like this that go up, up, up 10 feet in the air, and they would hold a photographer's seamless. And so every Wednesday night, climb up the ladder with this thing, and I'd put it up in the top, and then the paper would spill down off the altar like a scroll. And with that, I took my place in the center pew in the shadows of the candlelit sanctuary with my hand on the slide carousel button and prayed as we waited to see who would show. This was the very first slide on the very first night as people entered to gentle, contemplative piano music. It did not come naturally to most to use this arrival time to be still and prepare their hearts. A little gentle shushing was needed at first to retrain the chatty Lutherans and their guests in the gifts of silence. Okay, what gospel verse does this communicate to you? Anyone? You've walked in. It's the thing that is going to greet you. What is this an echo of? Okay, that's a good guess. I'm going to try one more. You ready? Come unto me all who are weary, and I will give you rest. That's what we wanted these services to feel like. And that's what they did feel like, because that rest, that silence, is the great gift that the church has for a very noisy 21st century world. After Pastor Ken had welcomed everyone, and before even the first song, this poem by Antonio Machado was read by an actor from our school community. Last night, as I was sleeping, I dreamt, marvelous error, that a spring was breaking out in my heart. I said, along which secret aqueduct, O water, are you coming to me, water of new life that I have never drunk? Last night as I was sleeping, I dreamt, marvelous error, that I had a beehive here inside my heart, and the golden bees were making white combs and sweet honey from my old failures. Last night as I was sleeping, I dreamt, marvelous error, that a fiery sun was giving light inside my heart, and it was fiery because I felt warmth as from a hearth, and sun because it gave light and brought tears to my eyes. Last night as I slept, I dreamt marvelous error that it was God I had here inside my heart. We opened each service with what I would now say with confidence was the invocation of light. On many of the nights we used this one from the Taizé, your word, O Lord, is a light, my God, enlighten my darkness. My Lord, O God, enlighten my darkness. In the early weeks, we'd sing it through 3, 4, maybe 5 times, followed by at least a minute of pure silence. Learning to be still in the silence is extremely hard for most people. When I traveled to Taizé, they told us, when people first arrive, they think the silences are much too long. By the time they leave, not long enough. Moving on in the liturgy, we use the Psalms to call people's hearts to rest. Some of you might know this chant refrain, in God alone my soul can find rest and peace, in God my peace and joy. Only in God my soul can find its rest and peace. After the first few services, one of the singers, someone infinitely more experienced in both music and Christianity than I was, suggested a different Taizé song, one she felt was similar but simpler to sing. She said, why don't we do My Soul is at Rest in God Alone. My salvation comes from God. I said, no. Does anybody know why? Why would I say no to something that sounds pretty similar? Okay, I'm going to tell you. Because I knew that salvation was a loaded word. And when we're trying to convey the beauty and fullness of God to people who may not yet know him, we don't want to make any unforced errors. Peace is easily disrupted by words that can detonate like landmines in the psyche. As an adult convert and a writer by trade, I knew that salvation was one of those words. It's funny for me to think about this because now one of my favorite entry points to faith is teaching people the connection between the word salvation and the root word yasa, to make wide. That contrary to popular perception or sadly common Christian behavior, a life of faith is actually intended to be a wide life, an expansive life, a life that is not lived like this, but like this. 15 years after I created these services, I would unpack all this in a book called Loaded Words, which Chuck referenced earlier. And 20 years later, I would translate this spirit of salvation in a song called Wide, which begins in the lyrics, take my life and make it wide. Show me every closed-off way in me. Bathe the tender wounds of my frail heart with the widest love of all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This kind of translation is what poets do brilliantly. This is The Word by Mary Oliver. How wonderful! I speak of the soul, and 7 people rise from their chairs and leave the room. 7 others lean forward to listen. I speak of the body, the spirit, the mockingbird, the hollyhock, leaves opening in the rain, music, faith, angels seen at dusk. And 7 more people leave the room and are seen running down the road. 7 more stay where they are, but make murmurous, disruptive sounds. Another 7 hang their heads, feigning disinterest, though their hearts are open. Their hope is high that they will hear the word even again. The word is already for them the song in the forest, They know already how everything is better. The dark trees less terrible, the ocean less hungry, when it comes forth and looks around with its crisp and lovely eye and begins to sing. Singing together in community and also having a private sense of contemplation in these services was a very big part of this worship. And so for us all to have a good feel of it, I think we're going to do this together now. Now what I have to do is I have to find my little cursor. Hold on 1 second. Oh, see, I'm going to have, oh, there it is. Okay. I think some of you will know this song, and if not, you'll pick it up quickly, and we'll all do it together. Oh, where'd my little guy just go? Sorry. He disappeared. Come on, there we go. Oh, Lord, hear my prayer. Oh, Lord, hear my prayer. When I call on thee. Oh, Lord, hear my prayer. Oh, Lord, hear my prayer. Come and listen to me. For 4 years, I gathered up the many gifts in our small church and school body, singers who'd never been asked to sing before, actors who didn't come to church but loved to read poetry aloud and did it really well, to handcraft these services and open wide the doors to our little sanctuary. I was invited to create simplified versions of these services for Image's Glen Workshop in Santa Fe for several years, and to help other churches do similar things, until finally I knew it was time to retire the service and get some rest. When I think back on the riches of those evenings and all the lives that were touched, one school father's words will stay with me forever. Heather, I feel like I was ambushed by God. Mission accomplished. So, okay, those were your first fruits, Heather. What have you been doing for the last 20 years? All right, come on. There we go. Well, as some of you know, I went on to get my MA in theology at Concordia Irvine. I did my thesis work on Man Turned In on Himself. I know a few of you have read it. Dale Meyer became one of its biggest boosters. You can see him here on the slide on stage in Michigan at the conference showing the image. And that is actually an image that I unearthed from the Renaissance service to use in the cover of that book to help visually translate sin for the 21st century. And, you know, if there's just one thing I can give you, I'm stepping outside of this talk just for a minute if you haven't read the book. People don't know what sin is. They don't believe it exists anymore. They don't get the description of it, and everything becomes individualized and comparable, and what you do is a sin and what I do is not, blah. Okay, so this is all you need to know. Man turned in himself, which is pure Luther, by the way. It's not Augustine, it's Luther. And that we're all like this. We're all just perpetually like this. This is our default. We want to guard and protect and hold on and have our little goodie, our power, our fudge, our point of view, our preference, whatever it is. And Christ is calling us to live like that. That image will serve you well, no matter where you are preaching or teaching, I promise. So I did that. I went on to write or co-write several other theology communications books, including Sola, which was written to present here at the SEM for the 500th anniversary, which is dedicated to Dr. Aaron. But this gift of knowledge and wisdom came at a price. In the midst of this seemingly fruitful season, God called me out of the church I loved so dearly and into a time of great suffering and prayer. I soon found myself spit out on the shores of a tiny, dying Lutheran church in the inner city of LA with a ragtag group of faithful Lutherans, mostly of color. For 7 years, I've helped to replant this little church, as together we learned what was essential and what was not, sitting in a circle of metal folding chairs each Sunday while we waited for God to show us how to best reach the community. Probably something some of you can relate to. We waited and prayed and waited and prayed and waited and prayed, and no one came. Until finally, we knew what we needed to do. If people didn't want to come inside a church anymore, then we would just make the walls speak for us. Within 3 months, we were known throughout the neighborhood as the little church where love rises, particularly among the homeless, to whom we started delivering warm home-cooked meals every Sunday before church. Soon after, we started the Love Rises Community Choir under the leadership of a woman who had come to make and serve food with us. And this choir continued to carry our community all through the quarantine, gathering and growing our members online. Just as vision leads to creativity, creativity leads to new life. The year the mural went up was ripe for me with new stirrings. It was the same year that I began hearing songs. The same year, I was led suddenly and unexpectedly to begin a 2-year certification program in Christian formation and spiritual direction. The first week of that program, each member of the cohort was asked to share their own personal faith journeys. Right after, we went on a field trip to the Getty Museum, where I found myself quite resistant to the idea of sitting in front of a painting and pondering its spiritual themes. Instead, I fled to the sunshine, laying on a slab of warm travertine marble, thinking about all the suffering that my dear classmates had endured for the love of Jesus and how it had led them to want to help others to know his call on their lives. It was then and there I heard this song, the whole first verse, the melody, and everything.
All the broken-hearted children grown up now and trying to hide shards and chains we never asked for, ancient pain still deep inside. Enter here, the wounded Savior. Enter here, where we were lost. Enter here, our one true Father. Take us home, now whole enough. All the longings for a freedom our desires can never grant, grips and grandeurs of our making, from dead-end paths we cry, I can't. Enter here, the wounded Savior. Enter here, where we were lost. Enter here, our one true Father. Take us home, now whole enough. All the ways you long to grace us with a love too wide to bear, tears and toils from all man's failure lose their sting in Christ's dear care. Enter here, the wounded Savior. Enter here, where we were lost. Enter here, our one true Father. Take us home, now whole enough. Enter here, the wounded Savior. Enter here, where we were lost. Enter here, our one true Father. Take us home, now whole enough. Take us home, now whole enough. Take us home, now whole enough.
This video was shot just over 2 years to the day of when I first heard it, after I'd finished my program and still couldn't shake the sense that I needed to birth this song. But you remember what I told you earlier, I had no music background, played no instrument, didn't sing, didn't know anything. So I grabbed someone who'd been coming to our neighborhood to teach the kids piano for 15 years, and I jumped him when he showed up on the street. I said, "Do you teach adults, and can you teach me?" And we started, And so in under a year, I learned piano and music theory and composition and notation and choral harmony and all these things. And I got this song on the page, and I went to this beautiful woman who is singing this song, who's been my neighbor for 25 years. None of those people in the video are believers, but they could all hear the pulse of the living God in this song, and they wanted to be a part of it. And they put in so much time to get it just right for me and to make it beautiful for me. And it began so many conversations and continues to daily. And people in that video who wouldn't have anything to do with anything will now accept and receive prayers in the name of Jesus as we sit in front of my house when they're struggling with some issue or some problem. And there are many stories that are just the kind of beauty that Dave Schmidt referenced earlier this morning that I won't share because they're private, but just know that they're true. This song would become the first single and the opening tune on my album, which I released last November, called Life in the Key of God. Oh, wait, sorry, don't do that. Although, you know, if you want to hear it again, no. Here, oh, sorry. I'm just going to share one more thing. It was never my plan or intention to sing any of my own songs. But 2 months ago, on the day of the Southern Baptist Convention vote for its new president, I found my spirit restless and agitated. I couldn't concentrate. I knew firsthand from our own synodical conventions what those events were like. And I knew full well all the ramifications and ripple effects of that vote to the larger church and to the nation. Hourly, I returned to prayer. And it was then that I heard this song almost in its entirety, and it was composed before the results were announced. Within days, I knew that I would need to sing it myself. And I will just share with you that this little video was filmed by that same woman you just saw singing, who is my neighbor, who brought her little iPhone and came to shoot it in the setting. And she sat down in that space, the space you'll see in a minute, and said, if I could go into a chapel like this every day of my life, I would just spend all day here. Really? and she said, it just makes me feel hopeful. at a time when our churches are facing very uncertain futures. Remember this: the future is where the creative person feels most at home. May we begin to trust that they can show us the way. Thank you.